The clock was pointing to 3 in the morning when my phone vibrated on the side table next to my bed. In a city like Seattle, where the rain never stops tapping on the windows, silence inside modern apartments becomes a heavy and artificial silence. I am Jack, a security systems programmer. I live in one of the most technologically advanced apartments. My apartment is a total smart home, where everything is controlled. The lighting, the cameras, the air conditioner. All of this via a sophisticated central system. I opened my eyes sleepily to check the message. I thought it was just a routine work notification. But my heart dropped to the depths of my chest when I saw the picture. It was a photograph of me. At that exact moment while I was sleeping. The angle was impossible. It was taken from inside the tightly locked closet. I felt a sudden coldness invade my room. A coldness that had nothing to do with the air conditioner. I got up slowly, and my hand was shaking. I grabbed a heavy flashlight. I headed toward the closet, and I opened the doors with one strike. But I didn't find anyone. My clothes were hanging neatly, and the usual scent of perfume filled the place. I thought for a moment it was a crude joke from one of my coworkers. But the real horror began when the speakers distributed in the corners of the ceiling turned on. It wasn't the sound of music. It was the sound of a faint and terrifying human whisper. The whispering sounded as if hundreds of people were talking at once underwater. Suddenly, all the apartment lights turned deep red and began to flash slowly like a dying heartbeat. I tried to open the control app from my phone to regain control, but the screen froze completely. A single message appeared in a bold and dark font on the screen. The content of the message was victim number 14. I became certain that the security system I trusted had become my jailer. I heard the sound of the electronic door locks closing, with consecutive and fast clicks. Tick, tick, tick. The apartment became a fortress that couldn't be exited, and the window was covered with bulletproof glass that couldn't be broken. I began to hear a mechanical hum, coming from behind the solid concrete walls. It was a precise sound, like the movement of very small motors working behind the paint. I directed the flashlight beam toward the ceiling, and I saw microscopic holes that weren't there before. From inside those holes, very fine camera lenses began to emerge, tracking my movement with terrifying accuracy. This wasn't a normal hack. There was someone who had designed this apartment to be a human trap since the first moment of its construction. I felt that the walls were beginning to close in on me, and that every screw in this place was watching me in silence. My luxury apartment that I was proud of turned into a sadistic and dark laboratory. The person who controls the system began to manipulate my surrounding environment, to systematically destroy my nerves. The temperature began to rise until it reached 40 degrees Celsius, which made breathing difficult. Then suddenly it dropped to below 0, and frost began to form on my fingertips. The goal was clear: to deprive me of any sense of comfort or safety. The giant TV screen in the living room began to turn on and off automatically and annoyingly. It was displaying pictures of me from my childhood. Pictures I thought were lost many years ago. But the pictures were edited. My face in them looked distorted, and my eyes were just empty black holes. I heard a sound coming from behind the kitchen wall. The sound of light and rhythmic concrete breaking. I crawled toward the source of the sound, and I found a small hole hidden behind the huge refrigerator. I looked inside with curiosity mixed with horror, and I saw very narrow passages filled with glowing fiber optics. They weren't just wires. They looked like nerves in the body of a giant and sick creature. I found an old stethoscope there. It was taped to the wall separating me and the neighboring apartment. I realized then that my quiet accountant neighbor was nothing but a cover for this nightmare. He had turned his apartment into a central control room to monitor the finest details of my personal life. His voice began to come out of the apartment's intercom system. It was a distorted metallic voice that caused chills. "Jack, do you remember your old fear of enclosed spaces? I will make you live that fear forever. But this time I will be your walls." Suddenly, the wooden floor began to shake violently under my feet. Thanks to hidden motors. He wanted to make me lose my balance and make me feel that the floor itself was no longer a safe place to stand. I tried to smash the front door with the fire axe I keep for emergencies, but the axe bounced back forcefully, as if I were hitting a wall of reinforced solid steel. I discovered that the door was covered with a hidden layer of metal. It cannot be penetrated by ordinary means. I felt despair creeping into my soul, as I realized that I am nothing but a rat in a complex technical maze. Every corner, every exit, and every idea for escape was monitored and precisely calculated by this sadistic observer. 3 long days passed without sleep, and sensory deprivation began to make me hallucinate and see terrifying shadows. The observer was reading my secret diaries to me, out loud through the speakers in the middle of the night. He was mocking my failure to build human relationships and my constant escape toward technology. Suddenly, at the peak of my despair, the bathroom door opened very slowly, and without any sound. I found him standing in the pitch blackness, staring at me with wide and bulging eyes. It wasn't my neighbor, and it wasn't a strange hacker. It was the former owner of the apartment, whom I read in the newspapers had died in a mysterious fire accident inside this building a year ago. He looked like the remains of a human being, very thin and pale as if he hadn't seen the sun for centuries. He was holding a small tablet controller, touching it gently as if he were stroking a living creature. He said to me, "This apartment is my body, Jack, and you are just an extra memory I need to continue." He said it while pressing a button that made the room fill with a white, numbing, and cold gas. I fell to the floor, completely paralyzed, but I could still see and hear everything with terrifying clarity. He began dragging me by my feet on the cold floor, toward the hole located behind the refrigerator. He inserted me into those very narrow passages, between the hot electric wires and the lurking cameras. He placed me in a narrow metallic space that doesn't even allow me to move my head or my arms. And he closed a solid iron plate over me, leaving me a very small hole to look through. "Now you will perform your job as part of the surveillance system for the new tenant who will arrive tomorrow." Now I live inside the walls of my former apartment. I became the sensors that work by touch. I see through my small hole the new tenant, as he enters the apartment with a stupid and confident smile. I see him eating his food and laughing on the phone. And he doesn't know that I am right behind the wall, monitoring every beat of his heart. And I see the owner as he prepares the same text message for him, the message that destroyed my life before. My tragedy is that I became an eye without a body, and a soul trapped in the electronic circuits of this house. And you who are watching my story and hearing my voice now, have you checked your room walls well? Have you made sure that that light hum behind your bed is just the sound of electricity? Maybe there is someone exactly like me, watching you now from behind the paint and counting your breaths. The end is not death, the end is to become part of the forgotten archiving, in a house that no longer belongs to you. Get ready, my friend, for maybe you are victim number 15, in this system that never sleeps. It was a very quiet night in Yavapai County, Arizona. The air was dry and the smell of burnt dust filled the place. I am Officer Miller. I have been working night patrols for many years. My usual route is Highway 17. This road connects small towns. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the radar spotted a black car traveling at a crazy speed. I turned on the red and blue emergency lights. The car did not stop immediately. Instead, it continued for a full mile, before it slowly veered toward the dirt side of the road. I stopped behind it at a sufficient distance as safety rules dictate. My car's lights were shining brightly on the tinted rear window of the black car. No one came out of it, and no window was opened. I got out of my car with extreme caution and my hand close to my weapon. The silence in the desert was terrifying. You could hear nothing but the hot engine of the black car. I knocked on the driver's window with my left hand. The glass lowered very slowly, and the face of a man in his 50s appeared. He was wearing a very clean formal suit, and he was smiling at me with a strange calmness. His eyes never blinked. I asked him about the excessive speed, and I asked him for his driver's license and car papers. He didn't utter a single word. Instead, he reached out to the next seat, and he pulled out an old video camera. He pointed the camera at me and started recording. I felt confused, but I repeated my request more firmly. Suddenly, I heard a voice coming from the back seat. It was a muffled voice. It sounded like a very weak moan. I pointed my flashlight toward the back, but the tinted glass prevented me from seeing clearly. The driver laughed very softly and said, "Officer, do you believe in fate?" And before I could answer, he took off in the car at a massive speed, leaving behind a thick cloud of dust. I ran to my car and the chase began. I was talking to dispatch over the radio, but the strange thing was they told me that there was no car registered with that number in the entire state. The chase continued for several miles inside rugged and dark side roads. The road ended in front of an old wooden house, and it was completely isolated from the world. The black car was parked, and its 4 doors were wide open. I approached the car cautiously, flashlight in one hand and gun in the other. There was no one inside, but I found something that made my heart stop. On the back seat, there was a printed picture of me, kissing my wife in front of our house early that morning. The picture was taken from a very long distance. I realized at that moment that I wasn't the one chasing. Instead, I was the one being chased. Suddenly, I heard a video recording start playing inside the abandoned house. I walked toward the house with heavy steps. The wooden floorboards were making a terrifying creak. I entered the main room, and I found an old TV screen displaying a live broadcast. The shock was beyond endurance. The broadcast was from inside my own bedroom. I saw my wife sleeping deeply, and right behind her, the man in the black suit was standing in the shadows. He was holding the same camera I saw with him in the car, and in his other hand, he held a long knife. He was waving to the camera with his hand, as if he was greeting me through the screen. I tried to call my wife. My phone was completely out of service in this cut-off area. I tried to scream into the radio, but nothing answered me except a static and terrifying noise. Suddenly the screen went out, and a deep darkness prevailed in the room. I heard the sound of footsteps right behind me. I turned around quickly. There was no one there. I found a small paper stuck on the wall of the room. Written on it by hand, "It took you 20 minutes to get here, and that is more than enough to end everything." I felt a complete nervous breakdown. I ran to my car at full speed. I was driving like a madman to get to my house, praying that I wouldn't arrive too late. I reached my house within 10 minutes. The patrol car was screaming with the siren sound. I jumped out of the car, and I ran toward the front door. I found it slowly open. I entered the house screaming my wife's name, but there was no answer. I ran up the stairs quickly. My heart was about to explode from my chest. I entered the bedroom. I found my wife still sleeping on the bed. I shook her hard. She woke up terrified by my appearance and my tears. She was fine, no one had touched her. I breathed a sigh of relief and sat on the floor from extreme exhaustion and tension. I told her everything that happened, but she looked at me with surprise, and she said she didn't notice anything strange. I noticed the old video camera, placed on the table next to the bed. The camera had a tape inside. I played it while I was shaking. The video wasn't of the man in the suit. The video was of me. I saw myself in the video entering the room an hour ago, carrying the knife and standing in the shadows behind my wife. I was wearing the same black suit I saw on the driver. In fact, I don't remember doing that at all. I looked in the mirror and saw my face pale, and my eyes hollow, exactly like the man I stopped. I realized then the terrifying truth. There was no other driver, and there was no black car. My patrol car was the black car in my sick mind. I suffer from acute schizophrenia and multiple personalities as a result of the pressure of night work for years. I was the one chasing myself, and I was the one who threatened my family. I looked at my wife, and I saw the terror in her eyes as she looked at my hand. My hand was stained with dried blood, and I didn't know where it came from. I heard the sound of real police cars approaching my house. Dispatch had tracked the crazy radio signals I was sending. The end is that I am now sitting in a solitary cell, wearing a white straitjacket. I hear a clicking sound on my cell door every night. And I wonder, am I Officer Miller? Or am I the man in the suit who is still waiting somewhere inside my mind? Reality is more terrifying than any ghost, because the real enemy lives right under your skin. The end is not death. Instead, it is waking up inside a nightmare you created yourself. Sleep well, my friend, and make sure that the person you see in the mirror is actually you. It was late this night. In the depths of New York City, the air in the subway station was unusually heavy and cold. I stood alone on the platform of the number 4 line heading toward Brooklyn. There was no sound except for a faint hum. It came from the old fluorescent lights. The lights were flickering slowly, as if they were dying in this vast concrete vault. I felt a strong urge to get home after a work shift that lasted for 12 continuous hours. The echo of my footsteps bounced off the cold marble walls in a way that made me turn around repeatedly. I felt like something was watching me from the dark corners, where the light doesn't reach. The train finally arrived. There was a metallic screeching sound that tore through the silence of the night. The doors opened very slowly, with a sound like the sigh of an exhausted person. I boarded the last car because I was looking for total isolation. I sat on one of the hard plastic seats that felt cold to the touch. There was a man sitting on the exact opposite side of the car. He was wearing a dark blue formal suit from a 90s style. I felt suspicious because the suit looked brand new, as if it had never been worn before. The man was holding an old newspaper and hiding his face behind its pages. I couldn't see his features, but I noticed his hand, which was trembling regularly. It trembled once every 3 seconds, with a precision like a mechanical clock. The train moved slowly and entered the darkness of the tunnel that connects the stations. The light inside the car began to flicker and shake with the fast movement of the train. We passed the next station, but I was shocked when I read the sign outside. The sign said Grand Central, which was the same station where I got on. I thought the driver had taken the wrong path, or that I was hallucinating from fatigue. The train stopped and the doors opened slowly at the repeated station. Suddenly another man walked through the door and sat in the seat next to the first man. He was wearing the same blue suit and the same shiny black shoes. He was carrying the same newspaper and started reading it in the same strange way. My blood froze in my veins as I watched the scene repeat in front of me. Neither of them said a single word, and they never looked at me. The train started moving again, and I began to feel intense pressure in my ears. The pressure increased as the train speed increased inside the dark tunnel. I tried to stand up to move to the next car, but my body was very heavy. I felt as if the gravity inside the car had suddenly doubled. I looked out the window and saw my face's reflection in the dark glass. My face looked pale and my eyes looked hollow, as if I hadn't slept for years. The lights went out completely, and a dead silence prevailed throughout the car. I didn't even hear the sound of the train engines, or the friction of the wheels on the rails. I felt an extreme cold coming out of the seat and spreading through my back. And when the lights came back on, I saw that the car had become completely full. There were 10 men wearing the same blue suit, and reading the same newspaper. All of them were trembling at the same time, and at the same terrifying angle. I began to realize that I wasn't on an ordinary trip, but in a time prison. The car started to look longer than it was at the beginning. The walls were moving away from me every time I tried to reach the exit door. The passengers in blue suits did not move, and they did not turn the pages of their newspapers. The man sitting in front of me lowered the newspaper very slowly. He didn't have a face in the sense that we humans know. His face was a completely smooth leathery surface, without eyes or a nose. In their place were just faint scars, resembling the texture of burnt paper. I felt an urge to scream, but my throat was completely dry. I tried to use my phone to call for help, but the screen was dead. The phone looked old and rusty, as if a century had passed over it. I looked at my hand and discovered that my skin started to change color slowly. My skin began to take on the same shade of blue that these men were wearing. I felt pain in my finger joints, and they started trembling automatically. I was losing control of my nervous system to this cursed place. The passengers raised their newspapers at the same time and stared toward me. Despite the absence of eyes, I felt their gazes piercing through my skull. I heard a voice whispering in my mind and not through my ears. The voice said that identity is just a burden in this place. It said that I would become part of the endless count of these missing souls. The train no longer stopped at stations. Instead, it started passing through them at lightning speed. I saw familiar stations. They were full of copies of me. I saw myself standing on the platform at Times Square Station, and I saw myself again sitting on a bench at Wall Street Station. All of these copies were looking at the train with great sadness and absolute despair. I began to understand that the train collects parts of my soul with every lap. Every station we pass takes a memory or a feature of mine. I started forgetting my father's name and the faces of my friends at work. The room began to narrow and the walls began to approach me slowly. The passengers all stood up and stood in the aisle surrounding me. They formed a tight circle that didn't even allow me to turn around. None of them touched me, but the heat of their bodies was non-existent. They were oozing the coldness of the dead whom time had forgotten in this tunnel. One of their newspapers started floating in the air and approached my face. The words on the newspaper were changing to become news about my disappearance. The headline said, "Search for the missing guard in the subway tunnels." And the date of the newspaper pointed to the year 2056, which is 30 years later. I screamed with all my might, but the silence swallowed my voice instantly. I began to feel like I was fading away and becoming just an idea in the mind of the train. A long time passed that cannot be measured in human minutes or hours. My mind became completely empty of any memory of the outside world. I no longer remembered what the sun looks like, or what the texture of grass feels like. The train is the world, and the passengers are my only family now. My body became completely stiff, and the blue suit became part of my skin. My hand now trembles regularly with the rest of the companions on this trip. Suddenly the train slowed down unexpectedly, and the sounds of the rails went quiet. The doors opened at a station that looked very normal and realistic. I saw a young man standing there and he looked tired from the night shift. He was wearing the same clothes I was wearing before I entered here. He was carrying the same backpack and the same look of hope to return. I felt the last shred of my humanity trying to warn this young man of this trap. I tried to rush toward the door and prevent him from boarding with all my strength, but my body moved automatically to sit in the seat opposite him. My hand raised the old newspaper to cover my face, which had become smooth. The young man boarded and sat in front of me while sighing from fatigue. He looked at me with suspicion, but he soon took out his phone to browse it. He didn't know that the phone would die a few minutes after moving, and he didn't know that I was in his place moments ago, or maybe years. The doors started to close with the usual and terrifying screeching sound. The train began to move to enter the dark tunnel for the millionth time. I looked at him from behind the edge of the newspaper and felt deep sorrow. I started to see his features fading under the flickering lights of the car. I placed my hand on his shoulder very slowly and felt his flinch. His features began to fade, and his skin started to turn a pale blue. I whispered to him in a voice that was a mixture of my voice and the voice of the train itself. I told him that the time has come to stop being one person. I told him that we are all here to be part of this eternal fabric. The station started passing again, carrying his face this time. The young man started holding a newspaper that suddenly appeared between his trembling hands. The end is that I am not Mark now, and I am not the man in the blue suit. I am just a mediator in this endless vicious circle. And every night there's always a tired person looking for a way home. And there's always a train waiting for him in the darkness to take everything from him. My tragedy is that I know what will happen to him and I can't stop. My tragedy is that I will keep watching him turn into a monster just like me. We are silent now, waiting for the next victim at the next station. The train will never stop spinning in the guts of this city. And the passengers will always stay trembling at the same time forever. Look closely the next time you ride the subway at night. If you see a man in a blue suit, never sit in front of him. Because you might not come out of that car with the same face you entered with. And your end will just be news in an old newspaper that no one reads. You will just be a memory fading in the silence of the dark tunnels. Sleep well, my friend, and don't think about riding the subway anymore.